So with that, I'm going to welcome our very first guest speaker to the stage, Mr. Ed Landgraf. He is chairman of the Coastal and Marine Operators Group, Camo. And I always ask my guest speakers for a fun fact about themselves. And so Ed's fun fact was that he was honored to be summoned by a US congressional committee to testify in Washington on how the oil and gas industry coexist in Louisiana's and the Gulf Coast ecosystem.
So thanks a lot, and all, you know, Emily, I want to thank you for putting this on. I represent an industry organization called Camo, Coastal and Marine Operators. These are our members and partners. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of our unique partnerships as we go through the presentation. But first, I wanted to share some facts, a little bit of who Camo is. I want to share some facts about the oil and gas industry, and particularly pipelines. I want to talk about some educational resources that may be available to folks on the call. And then, you know, I want to make sure that I'm accessible. Camo, we're a very transparent organization. You know, a lot of times the oil and gas industry seems kind of reserved from, you know, being a bit transparent and being open for questions from external stakeholders. And so we want to make sure that we're not put in that bucket, and that we can help you with any of that information that you need to the best of our ability. So with that, I'm not going to read this whole slide, but you know, Camo was formed in 2009. We have 25 oil and gas pipeline company members. We have probably a dozen different nonprofit partners. Our mission is to protect the safety of mariners and protect and prevent spills, specifically from pipeline infrastructure in the Gulf Coast region. I am going to focus on some facts and figures here in Louisiana, but you know, please understand that, you know, this information could probably be used in any of the coastal states. So at the end of the day, our mission is safety, asset integrity, preserving the environment, and preventing spills from happening in those areas, and of course preventing, you know, hopefully the example that Emily showed earlier. I'm just going to breeze through this for those of you who don't know. Everybody kind of likes stats and figures, but you know, Gulf Coast energy statistics, 40% of the nation's energy consumed comes from the Gulf Coast. Texas and Louisiana are home to 4 strategic petroleum reserve facilities. Louisiana, Texas, and Mississippi combined for over 7.5 million barrels of the nation's refining capacity. And this is 43% of the entire market share. So that means, you know, any of the fuels that are used, gasoline, diesel, jet fuel, kerosene, propane, you go down the list, 43% of that entire market comes from the Gulf Coast area. Specific to Louisiana, we're home to LOOP, the Louisiana Offshore Oil Port, has 1 million barrels of imported crude oil a day. Now, as we know, over the past few years, we've been exporting those type of commodities. So, but the facility still exists on the natural gas side called Henry Hub, located near Erath, Louisiana, has 49% of all U.S. wellhead gas production goes through that area. And an interesting fact, if you Google Erath, Louisiana, it's a very small dot on the map. And sometimes you'll see the natural gas price at Henry Hub is X, setting some of those market prices. Over 2.6 million barrels of crude oil traverses the Gulf Coast each day, and it's fed from 4,000 platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. And I'm going to tie that in a little bit to the coastal and culture area here in a couple of slides. And just to give you the amount of revenue that is produced from the Gulf Coast each year is estimated to be $6 to $7 billion of revenue for the federal government comes from the Gulf Coast area through energy. And so you say, well, why is that important? Well, no matter whether I live in Montana, Oklahoma, Chicago, wherever it might be, you know, those states, California, Los Angeles, whatever it is, you know, gets money from the federal government. Well, the federal government obviously has to make money and to be able to provide for roads, infrastructure, you know, taking care of folks and healthcare needs, all of that. And so right here in the Gulf Coast, the second largest federal revenue generator is oil and gas from the Gulf Coast. So this area is very, very important to the national, not only the national economy, but national energy security. So again, so how does this energy get from the Gulf Coast area? Probably 80% of the energy produced here travels through pipelines. You can see the pipeline network here. This map is a little bit dated, but actually it's more congested now than it was in 07. The 2018 map looks exactly like this. With even more infrastructure. So we've got to be able to get that. So when you talk about oil and gas impacts to the Gulf Coast, obviously you see in this area, you know, to be able to provide, you know, 40% of the nation's energy needs, it has to come from somewhere. And the people, the infrastructure, and the environment has actually bore that on their backs, if you will, from this Gulf Coast region. So just in Louisiana alone, there are 20,000 miles of coastal pipeline, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But first, you know, for over 100 years that it took to build all of this infrastructure, you know, it has created a lot of jobs, a lot of opportunities for fishing. The oil and gas infrastructure, people can argue that it does provide an excellent habitat for fish. So, and then, you know, the cultural aspect is, you know, when you've had an industry that's been someplace for over 100 years, you know, probably, I would say out of every 10 families that live in the Gulf Coast, probably 6 to 7 of those families has some type of oil and gas industry ties. And so I would argue that the oil and gas industry is a part of the culture of living, surviving, you know, hunting, fishing, you know, environmental, you know, I think that in some ways, the oil and gas ties to the Gulf Coast are, it's kind of a given because of how long the industry has been here. And people have grown up and made their living in that industry. So another thing I'd like to talk about is innovative partnerships, and talking about being transparent. You know, we've done work with all of these environmental and industry organizations through grant programs and even Sea Grant and NOAA. So we are really trying to outreach with our partners. And someone might say, well, why is the National Estuary Program a partner of Camo? Or Why is Lake Pond Stream Basin Foundation a partner with Camo? Well, you know, no different than they don't want to see negative impacts from oil spills, and actually neither do the oil companies. And you know, I have a couple of bullet line facts and figures that support that, and we can talk through that as well. So we're proud to have NGO and environmental partners to actually help us prevent spills in the areas of the coast. So some unlikely partners, but I think nowadays, in the spirit of transparency, you know, everyone working together to prevent spills, you know, is really one of the key drivers we all need to work on. So again, pipelines to get energy to the rest of the country, you know, especially from offshore, you know, it's got to get from deep offshore in these platforms to a refining complex to refine the product. And so that includes going through the Gulf, going through wetland areas, going through right-of-ways, going to storage facilities, and then to the refineries. So pipelines generally are known as the safest mode of transportation. But, you know, one of the, in the pipeline business itself, one of the largest culprits of spills is actually third-party damage, is somebody digging into the pipe. And we'll talk in a few slides about, you know, some of the commercials you hear on TV and radio. Call 811 before you dig, before you put in your swimming pool, or before you put in your mailbox. Well, that's no different than, you know, in the marine areas, you know, understanding what people want to do, what type of activity they're doing, you know, pipeline companies need to know that, so that way we can cut down on some of these spills. So, and again, this is kind of the oil and gas life path from these asset areas, if you will. Has to go to the refineries, has to go to different distribution facilities, and then gets on around to the end users. So there's a lot that goes in with all of this to actually get energy to people's homes and to their cars. So talk a little bit about pipelines and some of the hazards to pipelines and some of the interactions, because if you remember the first map, that it looked like basically a bowl of spaghetti. There's many, many pipelines out there. And so I will agree, some of them are abandoned, some of them could have been removed, but be that as it may, there's still a lot of active lines there and can cause a variety of incidents. Third-party damage, as I mentioned, is one of the things that we feel that we should be able to prevent, you know, because that just comes down to a lack of communication and awareness. And a lot of these third-party damage incidents has resulted in large spills. And you can see some of those impacts from a pipeline strike on the side here. But you know, when I talk about companies, oil and gas companies don't want to spill any product, whether it's oil, gas, whatever it is, any more than the environmental community doesn't want to see those spills. And even if you're not an environmentalist, the oil companies look at cost. And, you know, on average, a barrel of oil to clean up is a bit over $10,000 per barrel. Now that's pretty expensive, right? So why, you know, again, even if it just comes down to dollars and cents, and if oil executives don't care about the environment, well, even if they care about the bottom line, they don't want to have spills. So, so that's why, you know, we need to work really hard on the business side And then, you know, as Emily talked about earlier, and you'll hear more of, is also the economic and cultural side that oil spills impact. This is a chart that Emily went over earlier around coastal land loss, and you know, it also has impacts on the oil and gas industry. So this is a real pipeline crossing. When this pipeline was put in, it was buried with marsh. The marsh was healthy above it. And a number of years later, after the coast started breaking apart, these exposure areas of pipelines came into existence. And, you know, the threat here where it says caution is, you know, this company doesn't want any boats going through there and hitting a pipeline causing a spill until they can go in and lower this line. So a lot of different things can cause spills. Even restoration activities can cause spills. One of the very first after the BP Macondo spill and some of those Clean Water Act fines went to fund an early restoration project in Barataria Bay. And the irony here is that the oil spill that funded coastal restoration caused a project that caused an oil spill. And so we're trying to work with, you know, the coastal construction industry, trying to work with CPRA and others to make sure that, you know, the good work that is going to be done with restoring the coast doesn't result in another spill. So, and again, this is all about good communication, you know, being proactive. So I have just a few more slides here, but what can you do to prevent spills? Again, the very simplest thing, whether you're at your home or whether you're involved in a coastal project, even in marine areas, whether it's in the Gulf or lakes or bays, use the 811 free service. You know, it's the call before you dig. That's how pipeline companies and the oil industry gets notified of a project in your area. And some of the more complex events that cause spills are harder to prevent, but we feel it should be very easy to prevent these third-party damage spills where a project is actually impacting a pipe that causes an oil spill. And so enhanced communication is something that we can all learn from. Dredging is going to be a big part of the Gulf Coast in the near future, especially in restoration activities. This just happened in August of last year on the 21st. There were a dredge hit a propane pipeline, killed 4 people. And so, you know, this stuff is serious, although the spill implications were not bad because it was a more of a gas substance, but had it been crude oil, it would have been significant, as well as the 4 people who lost their life. And actually I found out just this past December, there was another person who succumbed to his injuries, making that death toll at 5. So that is a key part about Camo and what we do, and trying to communicate with vessels and people in the restoration community that understands the impacts to pipelines. And this is just showing there has been, you know, during coastal restoration activities and other things, there has been a number of pipeline strikes. So we do have a module at Camo. It's a little bit more geared toward industry, but this is an online training. It's currently free, but it will, in not too distant future, it'll go up to $5. It's a one-time $5 fee to take this online training. Again, you know, probably for the next 2 months, this training is free. Talks about working safely near underwater pipelines. Even if you just want to learn more about the industry, it is a good online training module to take. And as you can see, this is something that we partnered with the Lake Pontchartrain Basin Foundation, who is, you know, traditionally an environmental NGO, but, you know, they understand that, you know, preventing spills helps everyone. And so we were very fortunate to have them as a partner and through a grant program develop this training. And so, you know, if you want to learn more about the industry and pipelines and preventing spills, you know, I definitely encourage you to take this training. And in a couple of slides, I'll tell you where to sign up. But it has 7 sections. It's interactive. It does have a quiz, but it's 100% pass. Again, it's interactive with different animations and videos. And those of you who want continuing education credits, you know, you actually can print out a certificate as well. So if you want to take a picture of this page, you know, here's a web link you can go to. You can go to our Camo website at www.camogroup.org, and it'll be at the top of the page where it says register for online training. It's a bit over an hour, but I think it will help folks, no matter what you do, understand the industry a bit more. And that is my last slide. So at this time, Emily, I will turn it back over to you and see if there are any questions.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. It was really enlightening. We're actually going to save our questions until the very end. We're going to have that panel discussion with all of our guest speakers. So if anyone has any questions, you have them off the top of your head right now, you can put them in the chat box, whether you're on Zoom or Facebook Live, and I will compile all of those questions and we'll ask all of our guest speakers those questions together.